Welcome to Spiritual Reality. We're talking about God's man for the moment. His name is Moses. Our lesson today talks about Exodus 11 and 12, the Passover. And we actually have two lessons on the Passover. The one that I'm going to share with you today deals with all the historic facts and figures of just the first Passover that ever occurred. And then our lesson tomorrow will talk about the spiritual realities that go with the Passover, the typology and symbolism that is bound up in it, and Moses' part in all of that. Well, as you must know, the Passover is the 10th plague that God brought upon the land of Egypt as he pressured Pharaoh to release the Jews to go and worship him, actually to be released out of his slave-holding grip. And the Passover was a radical plague. They went through 9 plagues of discomfort, ranging from blood to lice to flies to dead cows to frogs to darkness and so forth. But I mean, those, though uncomfortable and distracting, they were nothing like the life-altering, family-impacting judgment God is ready to bring. In chapter 11 of Exodus, in verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, "One more plague I will bring on Pharaoh and on Egypt, and after that he will let you go." Up until now, every time God says a word about them going, he says, "I will do such and then I will harden his heart. You will say such and such, but I will harden his heart, and he won't let you go." Not this time. "One more plague I'll bring, then he'll let you go. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out from here completely." He's not just going to say, "Okay, you're released." He's going to say, "Hurry up, pack faster, get out of here, get out now," and that's exactly what will happen. In verse 2, "Seek now in the hearing of the people that each man ask from his neighbor and each woman from her neighbor for articles of silver and articles of gold." Now, this is the second time that God has mentioned this idea of plundering the Egyptians with a simple request. Not, "I'm going to break into your house, beat you up, and steal your gold and silver and fine clothing and linen and all else. I'm just going to ask you to give it to me." And what God does is, in verse 3, give the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And furthermore, the man himself was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt, both in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. Now that's a great turnaround. Moses has been feeling so sad and bad for himself because when he talks, what he talks about doesn't turn out well, and people get angry, and he feels that God is not undergirding him like he should. You ever been there? If you've been in ministry in a length of time, I'm sure that you have. But now, Moses is suddenly highly esteemed in the land of Egypt. Why? Because he's the plague worker. He can call out these various things that have swarmed on the people and attacked them, and then he can command them to relinquish and they go away. The people are impressed with Moses' power, and so they have respect for him, and the people have favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So suddenly the request for gold, silver, and valuables is perfectly legit. Take all you want. And thus they plundered them. Well, verse 4, Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I am going into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones. All the firstborn of the cattle as well. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as shall never be again. But against any of the sons of Israel, a dog will not even bark. I have protected you, Moses, throughout all the previous 9 plagues. Whatever was coming on Egypt did not touch the land of Goshen. And it's going to be true of the Passover. When I kill all these firstborn entities, not even a dog's going to bark in the land for Israel. Whether against man or beast, that you may understand that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these your servants will come down to me, and bow themselves before me, saying, Go out, you and all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out. So the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh won't listen to you, so that my wonders will be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders, yet the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he didn't let the sons of Israel go. But in chapter 12 and verse 1, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, This month shall be the beginning of months for you. Now God is establishing a tradition, a memorial, a sacrament really, for all the generations of the Jews to come. And the Jewish nation in the Old Testament had two calendars. They had a civil calendar that began in what we call September or October, depending on the exact date, and a religious calendar that began in what we call March or April. New Year's Day in the civil year, Rosh Hashanah, was the beginning of the year, and that fell in the 7th month of the religious calendar and ushered in the special events in the month of Tsiri, Feast of Tabernacles. But Passover, usually April 10th, right around there, marked the beginning of the religious year. So God said to Moses, on this month, it's from now on the beginning of months for you. It's going to have the first day of the year to you, and on the 10th of this day, of this month, each one of you is to take a lamb for themselves, according to their father's household, a lamb for each household. If the household is too small, team up with your neighbors. Make sure you don't have leftovers with this Passover meal. And the lamb is to be unblemished. The lamb is to be evaluated for 4 days, and then to be ready on the 14th day of the month to be offered in sacrifice. Verse 7, take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat this lamb. They shall eat the flesh of the lamb that same night, roasted with fire. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled, but rather roasted with fire, including its head, legs, and entrails. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. Whatever is left of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Eat it in this manner. All right, now so far we have an inspected lamb. He's proven to be without blemish, without spot. And of course that lamb speaks of the Lord Jesus. That's why it's so important. And this whole event really is about the lamb. We have the unleavened bread and bitter herbs as the accompanying side dishes to eating the lamb, and they point to the purity of the people of God. They point to the purity the blood of the lamb brings to them. They point to the purity they eventually will achieve by ridding their houses of leaven, literally, physically. And then the bitter herbs will be a reminder always of the great suffering that went with the great slavery and the 400-some years of slavery that Israel endured. One other thing, verse 11, eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. Why? Only reason given, it's the Lord's Passover. And I'm going to be going through the land of Egypt that night, striking down all the firstborn. But I want you to eat it ready to run. The only other reason for the ready to run part I can think of is that Pharaoh is going to come and say, run. So God says, be ready to run. Have your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, your loins girded, and you're basically going to be eating with one hand as fast as you can and be ready to run out of the land of Egypt. The blood that you put on the houses where you live is a sign for you, verse 13. It's a sign of my protection of your house for the judgment that in verse 12 I'm bringing on all the gods and people of Egypt. Oh, the gods of Egypt. When you go back and look at that list of plagues, you find out that nearly every one of them messes with an Egyptian god. The blood plague struck the god of the Nile. The frog plague struck the god of amphibious creatures. I mean, these Egyptians, hundreds and thousands of gods. And every one of these plagues, there was a god of the cattle. He was upset when the cattle all died. Right down to the god of darkness. That god is called Kuk. And in every one of these cases, God said, I am going to bring judgment against these false gods, which are in reality demonic entities. And the Passover is going to bring judgment on them, even as I'm bringing judgment on the people, striking the firstborn with death. And the blood will be a sign for you, verse 13, on the doors where you live, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. And this day will be a memorial to you. You shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations, and you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. And in conjunction with it, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Somehow, I believe that follows the actual Passover celebration and ultimately becomes part of the entire process. On the first day, you remove the leaven from your houses, and whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the seventh shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day, you have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the seventh day. No work is to be done on these. Observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt, and therefore you observe this day. Well, in verse 21, Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families. Slay the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of it of that blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts, and none of you shall go outside the door of this house until morning. For as the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door, will not allow the destroyer to come into your house to smite you, and you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. And this ordinance, you recall, is the means of fulfilling God's promise that included, I will redeem you. I just feel the need to really emphasize that this blood sacrifice of the Passover paschal lamb and its blood applied to the doorposts and on the lintel over the door, which when connected makes a cross sign, is the means of Israel's redemption. This nation is being bought as a redeemed people via the Passover lamb. And that's so very important for us to know. And we'll talk much more about the relating symbolism of the various other events of Passover. Well, verse 29 says, It came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. By the way, if you're interested in when this happened, scholars seem to mostly agree 1446 BC. 1446 BC. And on midnight of that first of the month, the Lord struck. 30 concludes, there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, Rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks, your herds, as you have said, and go and bless me also. That's the closest hint of anything spiritual or any acknowledgement of God in Pharaoh's life and conversation. The Egyptians urged the people in order to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We will all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened. See, they're concluding the Passover meal, and now they're taking unleavened bread, and they're going to take that and with their kneading bowls bound up in the clothes on their shoulders, and that's going to be their food as they begin their journey from Egypt to Canaan. That's their first meal, unleavened bread, which will coincide with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Verse 35 again reminds us of the plundering They requested from the Egyptians silver, gold, and clothing, and they got it, and they left, and they established a national treasury with all of this that was given to them. A mixed multitude went with them also. That means some Egyptians, some other Gentile people who became believers on some level, and they wanted to go along. 430 years to the very day, verse 41 says, they were in bondage, and now they are set free. And the mixed multitude that went with them can't partake of the Passover without circumcision and a few other regulations. But in verse 50, all the sons of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, and on that same day the Lord brought the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. What a marvelous triumph of God, of His Word. I think by this point there is scarce recollection of bricks or straw or anything like that. However, we will be fascinated in coming weeks to discover that the memory of Egypt is not always negative and doesn't always go away. And people are suffering. But from this lesson, we see God moving in power and support to His word and His people. He gets the glory. They get the blessing. The rebellious get the curse. That's how life works. Thank you, Lord, that you are in control and never make a mistake. Bless you for the Passover and all the picture that you give in it and through it to us of our relationship with you. So take time to give you thanks and praise in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, thanks for being part of our conversation today. It's been good to share the word of the Lord with you. And Spiritual Reality is brought to you by Rekindle the Flame Ministries at the Hub in Midland, Texas. God bless you.